Jessica's perfectly manicured hand squeezed my arm just a little too tight as she led me toward her boss at my son's wedding reception. "Mr. Thompson," she called out in that sugary voice she used when she wanted something. "I'd like you to meet my new mother-in-law. This is Dorothy. She's currently between jobs." The pause before between jobs hung in the air like smoke from a cheap cigar. But that wasn't the part that made my blood pressure spike. It was what came next. Delivered with a smile that could have cut glass. "Actually, she's been unemployed for quite a while. Bit of a loser, really. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from." Now, let me back up and explain how I ended up standing in a hotel ballroom wearing my best dress while my new daughter-in-law called me a loser to her boss. It all started 6 months earlier when Michael announced his engagement to Jessica Parker. I should have seen the red flags then, but love makes fools of us all, especially when it's love for our children. Michael had met Jessica at some fancy corporate event. She worked for Thompson & Associates, a mid-level marketing firm downtown. Real hot shot, according to her, account manager with a corner office and everything. She made sure everyone knew about her success, especially during those awkward family dinners where she'd answer work calls right at the table. "Sorry," she'd say, not looking sorry at all. When you're climbing the corporate ladder, you can't afford to miss opportunities. The wedding planning was a nightmare from day one. Jessica had opinions about everything: the flowers, the music, the guest list, and especially my role in the ceremony. "I think it would be better if Dorothy kept a low profile," she told Michael within earshot of me. "After all, she doesn't really understand professional networking." Professional networking. As if I hadn't spent 30 years building relationships in my own field. But I bit my tongue because Michael was happy. My boy, my only child, was glowing whenever he looked at her. And if Jessica made him happy, then I'd find a way to make peace with her attitude. What I didn't expect was for her to use our family's biggest gathering as an opportunity to publicly humiliate me. Standing there in that ballroom, watching her boss's face change as he processed her words, I realized something important. The game had just begun. Mr. Thompson's eyebrows shot up so fast they nearly disappeared into his receding hairline. He was a thin man in his 50s, the kind who probably counted calories and ran marathons on weekends. His handshake was firm but brief, like he was already calculating how quickly he could escape this conversation. "Unemployed," he repeated, glancing between Jessica and me. "I see." I could practically hear Jessica's internal victory lap. She'd successfully painted me as the family embarrassment in front of her boss. Probably thought it would make her look better by comparison. What she didn't know was that I'd been watching her performance all evening, cataloging every little power play, every subtle put down. And what she definitely didn't know was who I really was. "Well," I said, offering my most grandmotherly smile. "I suppose that's one way to look at it." Jessica's grip on my arm tightened. She wanted me to fade into the background now that she'd made her point, but I wasn't quite ready to disappear. "Tell me, Mr. Thompson, how are you finding the challenges in your industry these days?" His face brightened slightly. "Oh, you know how it is. Competition's fierce. Everyone thinks they can do marketing now with social media and all that. We're constantly having to prove our value to clients. That must be especially difficult when you're dealing with larger competitors," I said thoughtfully. "Companies with more resources, better connections." Jessica's head whipped toward me, probably wondering how the unemployed loser knew anything about business competition. Mr. Thompson nodded enthusiastically. "Exactly. There's this one company, Walsh Enterprises. They've been eating everyone's lunch for years. Massive client base. Incredible reputation. Their CEO is supposed to be some kind of genius, though nobody seems to know much about her personally. Very private person." The irony was so delicious I almost laughed out loud. Instead, I just smiled and said, "How fascinating." Jessica was looking between us with growing confusion, probably wondering how her loser mother-in-law was holding her own in a business conversation with her boss. The band struck up at last, and Michael swept Jessica onto the dance floor for their first dance as husband and wife. I watched from my table, nursing a glass of champagne that had gone flat 20 minutes ago. The happy couple looked perfect together, him in his classic black tux, her in a dress that probably cost more than some people's cars. But perfection has a way of hiding cracks, and I was starting to see them everywhere. "She's lovely," said Mrs. Patterson, the elderly woman seated next to me. She'd been Jessica's kindergarten teacher apparently, though Jessica had barely acknowledged her during the receiving line. Though I have to say she's changed quite a bit since she was 5. People do grow up, I replied diplomatically, though I was thinking that some people grow up into exactly who they always were, just with better vocabulary. Of course, dear. It's just Mrs. Patterson leaned closer, lowering her voice. She used to be such a sharing child, always making sure the other children had enough crayons, defending the shy ones from bullies. I wonder sometimes what happens to that kindness as we get older. I glanced at Jessica, who was laughing at something Michael had whispered in her ear. For a moment she looked genuinely happy, and I could almost see the 5-year-old who'd shared her crayons. Then the song ended, and she immediately started scanning the room, probably looking for more important people to network with at her own wedding reception. That's when I noticed her heading straight for the Hendersons' table. Robert Henderson owned the biggest construction company in the state, and his wife Margaret sat on half the charity boards in town. Jessica had done her homework. She knew exactly who mattered in this room, and she was working it like a professional conference. I excused myself from Mrs. Patterson and decided to powder my nose. But instead of heading to the restroom, I slipped out onto the hotel's outdoor terrace. The September evening was perfect. Cool enough for my shawl, but warm enough to be comfortable. I needed a moment to think, to process what had just happened and decide how to handle it. That's when I heard voices from around the corner. Jessica's voice specifically talking to someone on her phone. "No, Mom. It went perfectly. I made sure Thompson knows I'm not like these small-town people, especially the mother-in-law. You should have seen his face when I told him about her." Pause, then laughter. "Trust me, after tonight, he'll see me as the professional one in this family." I stayed on that terrace for another 10 minutes listening to Jessica make 2 more calls. One to someone she called Babe, which was interesting since she just married my son, and another to her sister, rehashing the same story about how she'd successfully diminished me in front of her boss. Each retelling got more elaborate, turning me from unemployed to basically unemployable to kind of pathetic really. The thing about eavesdropping is that it changes you. Not because of what you learn about other people, but because of what you learn about yourself. Standing there in the shadows, listening to my son's new wife tear me apart for sport, I realized I'd been playing a role for months. The accommodating mother-in-law, the woman who didn't want to cause trouble, the gracious loser who'd step aside for the younger generation. But that woman was a fiction, and fiction, as any good storyteller knows, only works if everyone agrees to believe it. When I finally returned to the reception, the cake had been cut, and the crowd was starting to thin out. The older relatives were making their excuses, pleading early bedtimes and long drives home. I found Michael at the bar, loosening his tie and looking pleasantly exhausted. "Mom, there you are. I was looking for you. Jessica wanted to introduce you to some more of her work friends." "How thoughtful of her," I said, accepting the glass of wine he handed me, though I think I've met enough of her colleagues for one evening. Michael frowned slightly. "Is everything okay? You seem different, smart boy." He'd always been able to read my moods even as a child. "Just tired, sweetheart. It's been a big day." I patted his cheek, marveling at how much he looked like his father at that age. "Your wedding was beautiful. Jessica looked stunning." "She did, didn't she?" His face lit up the way it always did when he talked about her. "I'm really glad you two are getting along so well. It means everything to me. Getting along." If only he knew what his blushing bride had said about me just an hour ago. But this wasn't the time or place for that conversation. This was his wedding day, and I wouldn't be the one to spoil it for him. "Of course we are," I lied smoothly. "She's part of the family now." And that's when it hit me. The perfect, elegant solution to my Jessica problem. She was part of the family now, which meant she was my responsibility. And I took my responsibilities very seriously. The Monday morning after the wedding, I sat in my home office with my first cup of coffee and a legal pad full of notes. Jessica had made one critical error in her little performance at the reception. She'd assumed I was exactly what I appeared to be, a retired woman of a certain age with no current professional connections. But assumptions, as I'd learned over 30 years in business, are dangerous things. I picked up my phone and dialed a familiar number. "Patricia, it's Dorothy Walsh. I hope you enjoyed your weekend off." "Yes, the wedding was lovely. Thank you for asking. Listen, I need you to set up a meeting with the Thompson account team for this afternoon. And Patricia, make sure everyone understands this is confidential until I decide how to proceed. Patricia Martinez had been my executive assistant for 12 years. She knew exactly what that tone in my voice meant. Someone was about to have a very bad day, and I was going to enjoy every minute of it. By Tuesday, I had a complete file on Jessica Parker Walsh. Her employment history, her college transcripts, her credit report, even her social media posts going back 5 years. Information is power, and I'd always believed in being thoroughly prepared before making any important decisions. What I found was fascinating. Jessica had been with Thompson & Associates for 3 years, starting as a junior account coordinator and working her way up to account manager. Her performance reviews were solid but not spectacular. She was competent, reliable, and ambitious. Exactly the kind of employee who did good work but would never set the world on fire. More interesting were her social media posts, Instagram photos from expensive restaurants with captions about client dinners that happened on weekends, Facebook check-ins at luxury hotels during what should have been business trips, and LinkedIn posts about networking events that looked suspiciously like vacation photos. But the real gold mine was her expense reports. Patricia's team had been very thorough. 3 years of questionable charges, creative interpretations of business expenses, and receipts that didn't quite add up. Nothing criminal exactly, but definitely not the kind of financial judgment you'd expect from someone in her position. I leaned back in my chair and smiled. Jessica had made the classic mistake of underestimating her opponent. She'd seen a gay-haired woman in a conservative dress and assumed she was dealing with someone's grandmother. Well, she was dealing with someone's grandmother. She just hadn't bothered to find out whose grandmother I was. By Wednesday, I'd made my decision. I called Patricia and asked her to schedule a meeting with Mr. Thompson for Thursday afternoon. Tell him it's regarding the future of his company's relationship with Walsh Enterprises. And Patricia, make sure Jessica Walsh now, is included in the meeting. Thursday arrived gray and drizzly, the kind of weather that makes everyone want to crawl back into bed. But I was up before dawn, selecting my outfit with the same care a general might choose weapons for battle. I settled on my navy blue power suit, the one I'd worn to my first board meeting 25 years ago, paired with the pearl necklace Michael's father had given me for our 10th anniversary. Professional, authoritative, unmistakably in charge. The Thompson & Associates office was exactly what I'd expected. All glass and chrome with motivational posters about synergy and thinking outside the box. The receptionist, a young man with perfectly styled hair and a nervous smile, announced my arrival with the kind of reverence usually reserved for visiting dignitaries. "Ms. Walsh is here for her appointment with Mr. Thompson," he said into his headset, then turned to me with a bright smile. "He'll be right with you. Can I get you anything? Coffee? Water? Just coffee?" "Black," I said, settling into one of their uncomfortable modern chairs. The waiting area gave me a perfect view of the office bullpen, where I could see Jessica at her desk, typing furiously at her computer. She was wearing a sharp red blazer, and had her hair pulled back in a style that probably took an hour to perfect. Professional Jessica, ready to impress. She hadn't noticed me yet, which was perfect. I wanted the element of surprise. Mr. Thompson appeared exactly at 2 o'clock, flanked by 2 other executives I didn't recognize, and bringing up the rear Jessica. She stopped dead when she saw me, her face cycling through confusion, recognition, and something that might have been panic. "Mrs. Walsh," Mr. Thompson said, extending his hand with a warm smile. "Thank you so much for coming in. I have to say, when your assistant called, we were all very excited about the possibility of working with Walsh Enterprises." Jessica's face had gone pale. She was staring at me like I just walked through a wall. "The pleasure is mine," I said graciously, shaking his hand. "Though I should mention it's Ms. Walsh. And before we begin, I believe there's something we need to discuss about one of your employees." The conference room fell so quiet you could have heard a pin drop on the polished mahogany table. Jessica had gone from pale to green, and I was starting to worry she might actually faint. Mr. Thompson, meanwhile, was looking between us with the expression of a man who just realized he'd walked into a minefield. "I'm sorry," he said slowly, "but I think there might be some confusion. This is Jessica Walsh, one of our account managers. She just got married this past weekend. And you're Dorothy Walsh," I said pleasantly. Jessica's new mother-in-law, and the CEO of Walsh Enterprises. I let that sink in for exactly 3 seconds before continuing. The same Walsh Enterprises that your company has been trying to land as a client for the past 18 months. Jessica made a sound that was somewhere between a gasp and a whimper. The 2 other executives, who I now realized were probably brought in to help pitch to Walsh Enterprises, were staring at me like I just announced I was from Mars. But at the wedding, Mr. Thompson stammered. Jessica said you were unemployed. She called you? He trailed off, apparently realizing that repeating his employee's exact words might not be the wisest career move. A loser, I finished helpfully. Yes, I remember, along with several other colorful descriptions, all delivered with such enthusiasm in front of your colleagues and my family. I opened my briefcase and pulled out a manila folder. Which brings us to why I'm really here today. Jessica finally found her voice. Dorothy, I can explain. It was wedding nerves, you know. I didn't mean oh, but you did mean it, I said gently. In fact, you meant it so much that you called your mother immediately afterward to brag about how you put me in my place. Then your sister, then someone you called babe, which was particularly interesting since you just married my son. The color drained from Mr. Thompson's face. He was starting to understand that this wasn't just about hurt feelings. This was about his company's relationship with their most important potential client. Perhaps, I continued, opening the folder and spreading its contents across the conference table. We should discuss Jessica's performance as an employee before we talk about Walsh Enterprises' business needs. The documents made a satisfying rustling sound as I arranged them. Expense reports, receipts, performance reviews, social media screenshots. 3 years of Jessica's professional life laid bare. Mr. Thompson's eyes widened as he scanned the papers. These are internal company documents. How did you do diligence? I said simply, when someone publicly humiliates me, I like to understand who I'm dealing with, and what I found was quite enlightening. I pointed to a particular expense report. This restaurant receipt from last March, for instance. Jessica claimed it was a client dinner, but according to the reservation records, it was actually her birthday party with 8 of her college friends. Jessica's hands were shaking now. There must be some mistake. Or this hotel stay in Miami last June, I continued, ignoring her protests. Billed as a business conference, but remarkably similar to the vacation photos she posted on Instagram the same weekend. The ones where she's wearing a bikini by the pool, not attending seminars. One of the other executives, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes, leaned forward. Are you suggesting that Jessica has been falsifying expense reports? I'm not suggesting anything, I replied. I'm simply presenting facts and allowing you to draw your own conclusions. I pulled out another document. This is Jessica's LinkedIn profile from last week. Notice how she describes herself as senior management and key decision maker at Thompson & Associates. Interesting title inflation for an account manager, don't you think? Mr. Thompson was practically sweating now. He'd obviously never looked closely at Jessica's social media presence, and what he was seeing wasn't painting a flattering picture of either her judgment or her honesty. Now, I said, closing the folder with a snap. Let's talk about Walsh Enterprises' business needs. We're looking for a marketing partner for our expansion into the southeastern markets. The contract would be worth approximately $12 million over 3 years. The room went dead silent. $12 million was probably more than Thompson & Associates made in total annual revenue. 12 million, Mr. Thompson repeated faintly. He looked like a man who'd just been offered a lifeline and a noose at the same time. The business opportunity was enormous, but Jessica's presence in the room was making it impossible for him to think clearly. Of course, I continued conversationally. Walsh Enterprises has very strict standards when it comes to business ethics. We found that companies with questionable internal practices tend to bring those same attitudes to their client relationships. I gestured to the documents still spread across the table. We simply can't afford to work with organizations that don't share our values. Jessica suddenly stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. This is ridiculous. You can't do this to me because of some silly misunderstanding at a wedding. I looked at her with the same expression I might use to examine something unpleasant on the bottom of my shoe. Some silly misunderstanding. Jessica, you publicly humiliated me at my son's wedding, then bragged about it to multiple people. You've been inflating your job title, padding your expense reports, and apparently maintaining relationships that your new husband might find concerning. What relationships? She snapped, then immediately looked like she wished she could take the words back. The babe you called after the wedding, I said mildly. The one you told about how you'd handled your new mother-in-law. I'm sure Michael would be fascinated to learn about that conversation. Mr. Thompson cleared his throat. Perhaps we should take a short recess, give everyone a chance to process this information. Actually, I said, standing up and gathering my documents, I think we're done here. Mr. Thompson, you have some decisions to make about your employee and your company's future. I'll be in touch next week to discuss whether Walsh Enterprises will be moving forward with this partnership. I walked to the door, then turned back. Oh, and Jessica, you might want to update your LinkedIn profile. I have a feeling your job description is about to become much more accurate. The call came at 7:30 that evening while I was enjoying a glass of wine on my back patio. Michael's name appeared on my phone screen, and I could practically feel the panic radiating through the device before I even answered. Mom, what the hell did you do? I took a sip of wine and watched a cardinal land on my bird feeder. Hello, darling. How was your first day back from the honeymoon? Don't hello, darling me. Jessica came home in tears. She says you got her fired. I didn't get anyone fired, I said truthfully. I simply had a business meeting with her employer. A business meeting where you showed up as the CEO of some company and ambushed her. Walsh Enterprises isn't some company, Michael. It's the company I've been running for the past 15 years. The company that put you through college and law school. The company that bought your first house and your first car. I kept my voice level, though I could feel anger building in my chest. The company your wife never bothered to ask about. There was silence on the other end of the line. Then quietly, you're the CEO of Walsh Enterprises. I have been since your father died. I kept our last name on the door because it was his dream too. But yes, I've been running it all this time. But you never said, you never talked about work. Because you never asked, I said gently. And because I wanted you to succeed on your own merit, not because people knew you were my son. I paused. Something your wife might have benefited from understanding before she decided to publicly call me a loser. Another long silence. Then she told me what she said at the wedding. She feels terrible about it. I'm sure she does, especially now that she knows who I am. Mom, please. She made a mistake, but she's my wife. Can't we find some way to work this out? That was the question I'd been dreading. Because the truth was, I could fix this with a phone call. I could make Thompson and Associates ignore Jessica's questionable expenses and inflated LinkedIn profile. I could hand them the $12 million contract and pretend none of this had happened. But that wouldn't teach Jessica anything. And more importantly, it wouldn't protect my son from the woman he'd married. Michael, I said carefully, what exactly did Jessica tell you about why she lost her job? The silence stretched long enough that I began to wonder if the call had dropped. Then Michael's voice came back smaller than before. She said you were vindictive, that you couldn't handle a little joke at the wedding, so you used your business connections to destroy her career. I closed my eyes and counted to 10. Jessica had learned nothing from our encounter. Even faced with the consequences of her actions, she was still playing the victim. And what do you think about that explanation? I think he paused and I could practically hear him choosing his words carefully. I think there's probably more to the story. There is. Your wife has been falsifying expense reports for 3 years. She's been inflating her job title on professional networks. And she's been maintaining what appears to be a romantic relationship with someone she calls Babe. Someone she called immediately after our wedding to discuss how she'd handled me. The sound Michael made was somewhere between a gasp and a groan. That can't be true. I have documentation, sweetheart. Phone records, social media posts, expense reports. I didn't manufacture evidence. I simply compiled what was already there. Why didn't you tell me this before the meeting with her boss? That was the question I'd been hoping he wouldn't ask. Because the answer revealed something about me that I wasn't particularly proud of. Because I wanted her to have the chance to come clean on her own. I wanted to see if she would take responsibility for her actions, or if she would continue to lie and manipulate. And she chose to lie. She did. Even when confronted with evidence, she blamed everyone except herself. I heard Jessica's voice in the background, shrill and demanding. Michael's voice became muffled as he covered the phone, but I could still make out pieces of their argument. Her insisting that I was vindictive and cruel. Him asking about the expense reports and the phone calls. Her claiming everything was taken out of context. When Michael came back on the line, his voice was different, tired, older. Mom, I need to ask you something and I need you to be completely honest with me. Always. Did you plan this? The whole thing, letting her embarrass herself at the wedding, investigating her background, setting up that meeting. Did you orchestrate all of this? I looked out at my garden where the evening light was turning everything golden. 30 years of building a business had taught me that sometimes the most important battles are won not through direct confrontation, but through patience and preparation. I didn't plan for your wife to call me a loser at your wedding, Michael, but once she did, yes, I planned my response very carefully. And now she's lost her job, and Thompson and Associates probably won't get your contract. Actually, I said, allowing myself a small smile. I called Mr. Thompson this afternoon. Walsh Enterprises will be moving forward with the partnership. Their company will get the contract, and they'll use the revenue to hire better employees with stronger ethical standards. And Jessica, that's between her and her former employer, though I understand she'll be receiving an excellent reference letter that accurately reflects her 3 years of service. Michael was quiet for so long that I began to worry about him. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I married someone I don't really know, didn't I? My heart broke a little for him. You married someone you thought you knew. Sometimes that's the same thing and sometimes it isn't. The question now is what you're going to do with what you've learned. After we hung up, I sat on my patio until the stars came out. Jessica would land on her feet. People like her always did. She'd find another job, probably at a company that didn't do background checks quite as thoroughly. She might even learn something from this experience, though I doubted it. But Michael would be okay. He was stronger than he knew and smarter than Jessica had given him credit for. And now he had all the information he needed to make his own decisions about his marriage and his future. As for me, well, I'd learned something too. I'd learned that after 30 years of being diplomatic and accommodating, sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to be anyone's doormat. Even if it means your son has to face some hard truths about the woman he married, especially then. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.